Code of Rule, Part 4.
It is true,
Gramash spoke slowly.
we cannot know all who will ever stand in our way.
He continued, looking at a few orcs who were watching intently from near his throne.
But I have seen much, and it is wise to prepare. I believe that we may soon face magics unseen on Draenor. We will not fall before them if your clans aid us with your magics. If you pledge yourselves to the Iron Horde, then you will earn your lives.
Morgoth nodded with both heads.
Done. But
And here the animal aspect flashed in Gramash's eyes.
if you falter, if you do not delicate yourselves entirely, I will give you to Korgoth Bladefist.
Bladefist. The chieftain of the Shattered Hand clan had strutted around the Colosseum as though he owned it. Then the High Mall had chained Kargoth beneath its walls. Famous slaves could be dangerous. Kargoth had removed one of his hands, left, right, to escape. But he still cut crooked wounds into his captors on the way out. One-handed, he had even freed other gladiators and coerced them into joining in his mad reprisals. Apparently, the orcs of the Shattered Hand now mutilated their own flesh in remembrance of their founder's crowning achievement. Morgoth pondered how long they would try to keep him alive with one head. Gramash was finishing up.
You serve us.
Bile began climbing up the insides of Morgoth's throat. He did not look at his retinue.
I understand,
He said flatly.
but you must know from the beginning of this partnership that some forms of magic simply cannot be taught, and not for the lack of will.
The messengers rolled her eyes. Perhaps she would slip from a cliff on the march back to Heimel.
The magics I speak of shape bodies and minds as chisel-shaped stone. As they empower us, they remove slivers of our being. This can kill even those who have spent their entire lives training for it.
He pointed, shot a glance at Koroth, alive still. Gramash rested his chin on one hand. He did not seem moved. The Imperator rushed to fill the silence.
You doubt my sincerity, but I have brought you proof, Verog, the cart.
Verog glowered openly, but he dragged the cart over. No doubt he had assumed it was to be used during a surprise attack on the Warsong camp, not offered in trade. If there had been a hope of catching Gramash unawares before, no such chance remained. Morgoth whisked the clothes off, and the faint whiff of upturned soil caught his noses. A dull chunk of stone stood monolithic in the cart. It did not wobble an inch as it was rolled before Morgoth's audience. Most of the orcs seemed unimpressed. It was a big rock, ragged and unshaped. Several of the intricate spirals and whorls decorating its face were duplicated in rough outlines on Koroth's skin. But otherwise, for an artifact riven from the belly of the world, by the noblest blood families in Heimel after a decade-long feud, it appeared unremarkable. The smooth stones secreted in Morgoth's pocket grew slightly warmer. He felt their heat radiating out in pinpricks. They squirmed, almost as if trying to get free. Surely, any shaman among the orcs would notice.
Would awaken,
The Imperator said with a flourish.
This great slumbering stone can dampen any magics it has felt, even those of your shaman. It has more significance in its means by which we mold our most accomplished breakers.
Pride danced on Koroth's face. Morgoth continued.
They are chosen for resilience. They are scalded by heat, crushed by rock, denied water, food, and air. Even the hardest can die in the process.
Gramash nodded.
First, they learn the signs and patterns of a school of magic. Then they must be struck by controlled infusion of that magic, like stitches or carvings, in the presence of this stone. Eventually, some of their life essence is peeled away, and a small part of it is replaced by the magic branded into their very being. They become immune to only one type of magic.
Grommash growled. Margok had experienced the same disappointment long ago.
Only one school,
The Imperator replied.
We have tried to empower our most gifted breakers with immunity to more schools. All die in the process.
Terribly, one had caught fire from the inside out. Margok continued.
The Sorcerer Kings have gathered artifacts, like this one, for hundreds of years. Many affect the workings of magic on living beings, but others defy description. They are more here in the ground, buried deep. I would share their power with you.
The war chief was walking around the artifact, squinting at it with renewed interest.
And this will make orcs immune to any magic, not just ogres.
Margok held back a small smugness that demanded to show on both of his faces.
Eventually, yes, your warriors are not as hardy as the greatest of Aimar. It will take time, generations, for you to learn to adapt, even with our tutelage. But it can be done.
A weighty grunt was Grommish's only response. Any reply without snarling or yelling was to be interpreted as acceptance. Satisfied, Margok steepled granitic fingers.
Then we agree. The Aimar clan will
There was spit in his throat.
save the Iron Horde.
He said nothing about their armies, territories, or mutual defense. Let Grommash ask for each favor on its own. The Imperator looked down at the scar-faced messenger. His now.
Send word for your legion to leave Aimar and return here.
He did not even notice that he was breathing more easily. It was done. Sour, but done. Clan and city both remained, and in time.
No.
Grommash interrupted.
The siege ends once you demonstrate the workings of this artifact, not before.
Margok's heads snapped around.
If I am to rely on your power in battle, I will witness it in battle.
Grommash continued.
Are you not veterans of the arena? It is a simple fight against a few of my champions. If your claim is true, it should be quick.
Blade Fist. There could be no doubt.
Lord Chief Hellscream, every ogre slain in Aimar is one fewer who can instruct your warriors.
The look Grommash returned made Margok's blood race hot through his ears. Both of the war chief's hands wrapped around his axe like a neck, and instantly Margok understood how deep the orc's hatred ran.
Do you refuse, Imperator?
Margok's minds went black. Inside them, he stalked, swore. His palms pooled sweat. This was peace with the Iron Horde. Not an accord, but a cage. Or had Grommash simply entertained the negotiation for a chance to humiliate him? He looked around for his retinue, trying to keep his movements slow and measured. But would they be? Orcs were everywhere, seeming to occupy the whole of his vision.
No, I accept.
Grommash Hellscream led them to the fighting pit. At no time were ogres more at peace with one another than when they conspired to murder. As they rooted through the piles of off-size weapons the orcs had provided, carefully selecting hauberks and spears, the company's enthusiasm was as palpable as that at a grand show in the Colosseum. At last, there would be no further discussion, only the unreflective simplicity of bloodletting, kill, win. Using Margok's ragged banner, the Centurions had constructed a makeshift flag atop a halberd, and they now bunched their hands around orcish swords like fistful of knives. Even Korath, the wound on his shoulder, festling under mossy bandages, was on his feet and hefting a pair of 2 small clubs. They did not even know what they faced. Idiots. Only Varog seemed tenuous, more comfortable with arcane than metal weapons, certainly. He played with a shield, picking it up and putting it back down again, as though waiting for an omen. Margok beckoned to them, his words lifetimes old.
You're prepared to lay down your lives for the glory of Aimar, your council, your imperator?
All feet stamped. Fists were raised.
Succeed today, and you earn us 1,000 years more on the mountain.
He looked at Korath. The breaker beamed back. Again, Varog tilted, ever so slightly, against his fate.
Will you not fight alongside us, Imperator?
It would have seemed an honest question, were he not attempting to catch the eye of every centurion at once.
I will fight with you, but my weapon will be the slumbering stone. Hellscream must have his demonstration.
I will give anything, Varog. Morgok drew himself up.
We do not know the nature of our opponents. You too,
He said, pointing at Varog and Korath.
are our defense against any magics, while the others seek to kill. Do not prolong the fight. Hellscream is interested in the stone, not in your deaths.
The ogres hung the standard of Heimal at the edge of the fighting pit, a shallow, rock-rimmed, divided, filled with sand and splotches of purplish-black blood. It was plain that the Iron Horde did not have anyone to clean it, or did not think this fight was worth the ceremony. Despite the presence of dozens of orcs hunched or standing around, barking at each other, there were no seats for the audience. As the orcs watched him, Morgok slowly wheeled the artifact to the farthest edge of the pit, opposite where Grommash stood. Varog followed, grabbing on to the back of the cart to help push it.
Imperator,
Varog whispered.
you must have support with the artifact. Let me assist you.
No.
Morgok said, waving him off.
What if you're injured in a fight or killed? No one else has invoked the slumbering stone.
His eyes were big and manic. He reached toward his king. He could be pleading or preparing to choke. Morgok slapped the hands away.
No, your place is in the pit. Go down.
Miraculously, he did. If they were both going to die, at least Varog would die first. There were no entry gates on either side of the fighting pit. One at a time, the other ogres hopped down, kicking up gusts of sand. And they began checking the walls, taking positions, tapping their weapons on the ground, using the floor as their shared drum, bashed at speed without any change in rhythm. More sand billowed up. Guttural battle drums echoed from their throats, only occasionally harmonizing.
You are ready.
Grommash said, and the talk suddenly shut off like rain sealed in a cloud. It was not a question. Morgok crouched in front of the artifact. Its warmth was comforting, though he had already begun to feel enervated in its presence.
Bring out the prisoners.
Hellscream bellowed. A dozen bedraggled figures were led in chains to the southern edge of the pit. They were orcs, none bigger than the warriors by Grommash's side. But their moth-bitten violet robes and unkempt hair and beards made them seem far smaller. To a one, they were unarmored and unarmed. Their only unusual characteristic was their green skin. Grommash spoke softly to one prisoner, whose responses were inaudible.
I will not give you freedom, warlock.
The war chief raised his voice, meant for Morgok's troops to hear.
But any among you who kills an ogre may choose a reward, a clean palate, or a quick death.
What was a warlock? Morgok had never heard the word before. What was their crime? The Imperator felt a twinge of suspense stabbing at his spine. From their pitiful look, the orcs were likely thieves. But would Grommash let thieves keep their hands? The ogres in the pit puzzled at the sight of their tiny foes, and Korath scratched his head and snickered, while the orcish prisoners had the chains around their waists and ankles removed. As they got closer, Morgok noticed lumpy whip marks on the prisoners' arms and shoulders. Some of their cuts were still fresh. They weakly clambered down into the pit. When their feet hit the sand, a dozen against 5, the spectators began craning their necks to watch. Morgok sucked a breath down each throat. Certainly they would use magic, but what kind? They held no trappings, showed no signs.
Begin!
Hellscream shouted. Before the war chief opened his mouth, Verog had already planted both of his feet and swept back one massive leg, drawing a half circle in the sand, palms out. The prisoners were caught unawares as ice surged up from the sand like a wave, engulfing two of them entirely, crushing them and dragging them down the reddening wrecks of their bodies. Morgoth's fingernails scraped against the base of his palm, and then he pressed it on the artifact. The spells he wove around himself each morning retreated. His invisible arcane shield slowly dissipated. His clothing grew lighter and looser as it shed its imperviousness to fire. He was vulnerable, but he could feel the stone's power stir. He met the orcs' eyes and saw that they were glazed and unfocused. Their magic was no communion. Then, the other ogres charged across the pit in a tight herd, gripping multiple smaller weapons in each fist, mammoth feet flinging sand and ice. They swiftly closed the distance as the orcs, moving in unison like marionettes tied to the same string, began to invoke their magics. There were indications of their schools, but no sureties, not arcane or shamanic traditions. He would have recognized such magic by now. Long dead words slithered from their lips.
Scatter!
Morgoth thundered. His retinue obeyed with wordless coordination, fanning out to reduce the chance that more than one would be hit by a single attack. If the orcs varied their magic, striking each ogre with multiple spells, a few among Morgoth's companions would survive, and that would be enough. He began to brush the whorls on the lower half of the artifact. The orcs twitched their fingers faster in recondite movements. The Imperator squinted, trying to read their magic as they called it down, but it was alien. He grinned as Koroth busily smashed a club through one of the orc's throats and stopped when the breaker skin flaked off his body like leaves under boiling water. 10 orcs loosed the same invocation. Morgoth had never seen its likes anywhere. Baleful greenish-yellow flame, burning the very air it hung in, drawing scorched breaths from the lungs of everyone watching, whirled through the fighting pit. No, it struck the ogres with the force of a hurricane, scalding off their skin in an awful instant. The champions of Highmoor were withered lumps, their featureless bodies folded into the sand, a few strays of hair catching fire as the only evidence that they had ever lived. No. Morgoth slammed both his hands against the artifact. It did not respond. End of part 4.